Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I've been secretly going through and trading for a few of these wide receivers. Now, I'm not going to lie. A lot of these guys I've talked crap on. A lot of these guys I said were significantly overvalued an offseason ago. But now that the price has come down a bit, and in my opinion, there's no reason for it to have, we should probably be looking to buy in at a discount. But before we get into it, go down there, drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you play Dynasty Fantasy Football, and of course, if you want to check out any of these player props for the Super Bowl, if you want to get into a draft with us, you can find that link in the comment section, find it in the description of this video. When you sign up to Underdog Fantasy with promo code FLOCK, they're going to match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100, and with a minimum of a $10 deposit, not only can you get in drafts with us, but you'll also get our 2023 Dynasty Fantasy Football rankings, so make sure you take advantage of that. That should be it. Let's go through. Let's talk about someone that was literally going in the 4th round on Underdog last year. Gabe Davis. Gabe Davis, yes, was laughably overvalued a year ago. Yes, everybody knew this, or at least seemed like most people knew it. And with Gabriel Davis, if I go through and pull up his keep, trade, cut price chart, you're going to see that, hell, he's fallen a ton in value. I mean, he peaked before the season started, looking at wide receiver 15, and now he's down there at wide receiver 40. And this is before the 2023 rookies get added in. He's probably actually closer to the wide receiver 45, wide receiver 46. And while, yeah, he was extremely overvalued at wide receiver 15, and there's no reason you should have ever been paying that price point, wide receiver 40 is a completely different story. If you're able to get him as your wide receiver 4, I don't see how this could be a bad investment, because if we go through and look at the career arc that we've seen from Gabriel Davis so far, we need to keep in mind a few different things here. Gabriel Davis, came into the NFL at an incredibly young age. Gabriel Davis came into the NFL and played his entire rookie season at 21 years old. I mean, Gabriel Davis just played his 3rd season here at 23. He's not going to turn 24 for another few months. And on top of this, Gabriel Davis was a day 3 selection in that 2020 NFL draft. Gabriel Davis went in the 4th round, and what we historically know is those rookies that go later on, those guys that go on day 3 of the NFL draft, even if they break out early on in their NFL career, it's actually going to take them a little bit longer to earn the trust of both the quarterback and the coaching staff to become a full down player. We saw this exact thing play out with Stefon Diggs back in Minnesota early on, where he flashed elite efficiency but wasn't able to command volume until a little bit later on than what you would see with a 1st round wide receiver breakout, such as a Jefferson, Chase, Waddle. I know those are extreme examples, but still using them to prove a point here. And if we're going to go through and look at Gabe Davis, this past season at 23 years old was by far and away his best season yet. You're looking at a wide receiver that, hell, I mean, had 17.4 yards per reception, still incredibly efficient as that deep threat option. You're looking at a wide receiver that in only 15 games played, the fewest amount of his entire NFL career, had more targets, more receptions, and more receiving yards than he had ever had. I mean, he goes out there 93 targets in 15 games, 48 receptions, 836 receiving yards, 55 receiving yards per game this season compared to 34 a year ago. So it's Gabe Davis' best season ever at 23, but because people were way too excited about him an offseason ago, he disappointed. He disappointed your expectations. He didn't disappoint from a real life standpoint. I would make an argument that he's been phenomenal, because if we go back to what we were discussing previously of those guys that go on day 3 of the NFL draft, usually having a harder time actually getting on the field and making an impact early on, we can see this play out. If I'm going to be looking at any player that was selected after pick 100 of the NFL draft and they were 24 years old or younger at any season since 2010, we'll be filtering down that player pool for players that averaged 5.5 targets per game, 50 receiving yards per game, half a receiving touchdown per game, and 9 yards per target. Here's who you have. I mean, in order of the most recent guys. Gabriel Davis did it in 2022. Phenomenal. Funny enough, Austin Eckler did it. I don't think we should be looking at Eckler, obviously, two completely different players. But outside of that, since 2010, the only other guys Tyreek Hill did it twice. Tyreek Hill did it in 2017. Tyreek Hill did it in 2018. Allen Hurns 2015. And Josh Gordon 2013. So if we're looking at the level of efficiency at an incredibly young age coming from later on in the NFL draft, good luck finding someone that has a better profile than Gabe Davis. It's crazy that I'm saying this. We spent the entire offseason last year saying how overpriced he was, blah, 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 when on September 14th, he was the wide receiver 15 on Keep Trade Cut. He was going in the third, fourth round on Underdog. It was laughable then, but if anything, he only impressed me and his price is cratered. I like Gabe Davis at this price. Now, our next guy that I actually liked last offseason, I like him again this year, Jahan Dotson. I mean, if we're going to be looking at Jahan Dotson, why I really liked him coming out of Penn State is the dominance we saw as a junior and senior. Now, of course, you have to give him a big red flag for staying all 4 years in college, because usually what you see with those four-year players is they didn't have the talent to declare early on, and then by the time they're dominating their fourth season, it's just because they're 22, 23 years old, playing against 18-year-old college kids that have no future in the NFL. Well, with Jahan Dotson, he broke out and dominated as a junior. It made sense why he would actually have a later breakout. Keep in mind, he went to Penn State. You had KJ Hamler and Pat Freiermuth there early on in his NFL career, and the level of dominance was extreme. He almost averaged 50% of this team's passing yards per game. Almost every other passing yard that was thrown in this offense went to Jahan Dotson his junior and senior season. It was incredible. It was nasty. He was a good athlete, ran a 4.43 40-yard dash, goes at pick 16 in the NFL draft. So he has the production, he has the athleticism, he has the team investment. He checks almost every box except the fact that he stayed all 4 years, which I think people honestly read into too much this past offseason with guys like Jahan Dotson and Christian Watson and allowed us to have those discounts. And if we're going to look at Jahan Dotson, I will admit we're maybe cherry picking a few of the statistics here. We're just going to be looking at, in my mind, every valuable receiving game statistic. It kind of looks like we're cherry picking them based on how good this season was, where we are going to be looking at since 2010, wide receivers that were drafted in the first round of the NFL draft that as rookies averaged at least 2.5 receptions per game, 4.5 targets per game, 38 receiving yards per game, half a touchdown per game, and 7.5 yards per target. Here are the wide receivers in order since 2010. Jahan Dotson, Jamar Chase. Don't know if you know about Jamar Chase. He's pretty good. Hollywood Brown, Calvin Ridley, Odell Beckham Jr., Mike Evans, Julio Jones, AJ Green, Des Bryant. Now, of course, I am not sitting here saying Jahan Dotson should be a first-round Dynasty startup pick. I think that, honestly, maybe it's just a little bit skewed here because he was able to get to half a receiving touchdown per game. And honestly, I'm not putting him in the class of these other wide receivers. But you're not paying the price as if he is in the class of these other wide receivers. If I'm going through and looking at Keep Trade Cut, right now he's going to be neck and neck with Terry McLaurin, Hollywood Brown, Dameon Pierce, Christian Kirk, Joe Mixon, Derrick Henry, Deontay Johnson. And if we're looking at all those players, I really do like Jahan Dotson. Now, there are some red flags. There are some things to not be too excited about. Keep in mind, the situation's horrible. Terry McLaurin was extended, so you're going to be dealing with Terry McLaurin this next season. Not only are you going to be dealing with Terry McLaurin, but at the same time, you're going to have really bad quarterback play. Like, I don't know who it's going to be. I mean, I'm seeing some mock drafters giving Anthony Richardson to the Washington Commanders, which maybe saves his team. Even in that case, I wouldn't assume that there'd be a ton of passing volume in Washington. So I love the player. I don't see how the situation gets too much better. I don't want to act like just because he was so good his rookie year, he's going to be the next Julio Jones. No, he's not going to be that. But I think he can be a top 24 wide receiver for a very long time. And I'd happily sell someone like Hollywood Brown or Christian Kirk to grab him. Now, going over to our next guy, I don't even want to bring him up. Mike Williams. With Mike Williams, another player very similar to Gabriel Davis. He was overvalued both in Dynasty as well as redraft coming into this season. Underdog drafts, he was going in the middle of the third. I literally think I took him in 2 drafts total out of our 700 plus. I mean, Dynasty, it was crazy that he was getting all this hype. I felt like it was just people hyping up the big, tall wide receiver because he looked the part, even though we really hadn't seen the consistent trend of production, even though Keenan Allen, in my mind, looked like the wide receiver 1 for the Los Angeles Chargers. But his price has fallen a decent amount, just like what we saw with Gabe Davis. I mean, he actually peaked out as being valued as a mid wide receiver 2. Now, according to Keep Trade Cut, he's the wide receiver 37, so a low-end wide receiver 3, high-end wide receiver 4. If we're going to be looking at this past season, I mean, hell, it's kind of similar to the year he had previously. He had 68.8 receiving yards per game compared to the year prior at 71.5. But keep in mind, this is a wide receiver that was dealing with injuries. If you're actually removing those injury-riddled games, you're going to be looking at Mike Williams with his best season of his NFL career. Now, I know he was disappointed because the expectations with him coming in were way too high. But if we're going to be looking at this situation going forward, I mean, the Los Angeles Chargers really don't have too much depth at the wide receiver position. It's not like Joshua Palmer all of a sudden is going to be the wide receiver 1 on this team. If we're going to be looking at the contract situation, it is very interesting between Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. This will be one thing that I want to say. Please, of course, you're only trading for Mike Williams if you're a contending roster and only if you're getting a very real discount, because I think he could be a mid to high-end wide receiver 2 next season, but long-term, the value proposition may not necessarily be there. Both Keenan Allen and Mike Williams don't have long-term guaranteed contracts, where if the Los Angeles Chargers decided to move on from Keenan Allen in 2024, they would save about $23 million, and Keenan Allen would be 32 years old that season. So in my mind, are you going to pay Keenan Allen an additional $23 million at 32 years old? Or are you probably going to be moving on from him after 2023? I think they probably move on from Keenan Allen after this next season. But at the same time, if Mike Williams doesn't perform well in 2023, he could be in that same boat, because they could save $20 million from moving on from Mike Williams in 2024, and he's going to be 30 years old at that point. So I think what probably ends up happening is they probably end up keeping Mike Williams 2024, moving on from Keenan Allen. I think Mike Williams probably has 2 seasons going forward of top 24 wide receiver production attached to Justin Herbert. Just another one of these guys that, I mean, I feel like we're just buying them on the dip because people are irrationally low when nothing's really changed. Now, our next guy, I will say it's going to be tougher to go through and easily trade for because he has his massive truthers. Rashad Bateman is somewhat intriguing dependent on the price point you're paying. Because if you're looking at Rashad Bateman, if you loved him before, nothing should really have changed for you. Keep in mind, this was a wide receiver that almost missed this entire season. He only played 6 games, but in those 6 games played, he averaged 47.5 receiving yards on a per game basis. Keep in mind, he left the game early with an injury. So in reality, this number would be a little bit higher, would be about 50.5 receiving yards per game. He had 19 yards per reception. Keep in mind, he had some very long receptions, skewing this data just a bit. He was by far and away the wide receiver 1 in this roster. He was commanding all the volume, but the injury has had his value just absolutely crater. He was the wide receiver 17 before the injury. Now he's the wide receiver 34. Like I said, I really do think this is going to be up to you with Rashad Bateman on if you're going to be willing to pay that price point. I do want to say, if you didn't like him before the injury, there's no reason to be jumping up and down saying, oh, I love him now. I love him now. Like, I didn't really like him too much with where he was priced before the injury. Now I'm interested. But if you loved him before the injury, you should be going after him everywhere you can. I mean, right now he is being valued directly behind a 2023 early 2nd round pick, directly in front of guys like Dalvin Cook, Tyler Algier, Rashad White, Mac Jones. So I don't want to sit here and act like Rashad Bateman's the biggest value on this list. I just want to say, if you are a Rashad Bateman truther and you're really wanting the discount, I think it's a fair price. Now, our last guy I'm going to bring up here is dirt cheap, literally free. David Bell, someone that's intriguing that I'm adding on to deals. Now, the big thing that we're talking about with players that are this cheap, with players that are worth literally nothing, is I do not want you to go out there and just message the David Bell owner in your league saying, hey man, I like David Bell. What do you want from him? Because immediately he's going to go, okay, give me your second round pick. Give me your second round pick and you can have him. Where in reality, it's probably not a good deal. You'd probably rather have your second round selection. I think you need to be a little bit more creative with trading for David Bell. An example of what you could possibly do is if you had two wide receivers that were very close in your rankings, right? Like you're looking at Hollywood Brown, Christian Kirk, right? Hypothetical scenario, you have Hollywood Brown, your other league mate has Christian Kirk. He also has David Bell on his roster. If you don't care who you have between those two wide receivers on your team, you could go through and you could say, hey man, I'll send you Hollywood Brown for Christian Kirk and David Bell. And if he says no to that, if he needs a little bit more juice, then maybe you go through and add in a third or a fourth round rookie pick. And in that way, instead of going through and having to trade a rookie pick straight up for David Bell that may cost you a second rounder, you're able to essentially do an equal swap and trade a third round pick for David Bell. I mean, if I'm looking at the David Bell profile, liked him coming out of Purdue at the discount you were getting based on the production profile. Of course, not a good athlete, but he plays the slot, so it doesn't really matter. If we're looking at the Cleveland Browns offense going forward, I'm going to be operating on the assumption that Deshaun Watson will be better next season than he was this year. They also traded pretty much everything to get Deshaun Watson. They gave him the most guaranteed money in NFL history. So you're in a spot where they're going to have a difficult time investing into the wide receiver position. So it's a good situation, in my opinion. And at the same time, at the end of the day, hell, he's free. Literally free. I don't want you to go through and trade a lot for him, just if you can get him as a throw-in in a deal. But I think that's all I got for you. If you enjoyed this video, please go down there, drop a like, subscribe to the channel if you play Dynasty. If you want to check out any of these player props, you want to get in a draft with us, you can find that link in the comment section in the description. Underdog Fantasy, use promo code FLOCK, and they'll also match your first deposit, dollar for dollar up to $200. Plus, you'll get our 2023 Dynasty rankings. But I think that's all I got for you. Thank you again. I appreciate you, and I hope you have a great day.